I spent 33 years believing that being a good daughter meant absorbing every family crisis like a shock absorber. When the probate office called, I thought my grandfather's legacy was finally my chance to breathe. Instead, at a quiet dinner in Crestmore, my parents smiled and told me my inheritance had already been redirected to my sister. They told me not to be selfish. They had no idea that the only thing I would give them in return was a single, devastating piece of paper. The phone call that dismantled my life came on a Tuesday afternoon, sandwiched between a budget meeting and a lukewarm cup of coffee. The fluorescent lights of my office hummed with their usual headache-inducing frequency, and the rain smeared the gray skyline of the city against the window pane. I looked at the caller ID. It was a local number from Briar Glen, the town where my grandfather had lived and died, and where I had spent the few truly peaceful summers of my childhood. I picked up the phone. "Is this Audrey Foster?" a woman's voice asked. She sounded older, her voice carrying the specific, dusty cadence of someone who spent her days surrounded by filing cabinets and legal folios. "Speaking," I said. "This is Martha from the Briar Glen Probate Office. I am calling regarding the estate of Arthur Foster. We have finalized the liquidity of the specific bequest he left in your name. The check is ready for distribution." For a moment, the office sounds faded away, the clicking of keyboards, the low murmur of my coworkers discussing lunch plans. It had been 8 months since Grandpa Artie died. 8 months of numb grief that I had neatly packed away into boxes, just like I had packed away his flannel shirts and his collection of birdwatching guides. I had not expected anything substantial. Grandpa lived simply. He drove a truck that was older than I was and repaired his own roof well into his 70s. I blinked, staring at a spreadsheet on my monitor that suddenly made no sense. I did not realize the process was finished. I said, "My father told me the estate was complicated, that it might take years." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a pause that felt heavy, textured with things unsaid. "The main estate is still in probate." "Audrey," Martha said, "but this was a specific bequest, a separate account. It bypasses the general estate flow. It is $75,000. The number hit me like a physical blow to the chest. 75,000. I sat down hard in my ergonomic chair. To some people, perhaps to the clients my firm managed, that was a rounding error. To me, at 33 years old, it was freedom. It was the student loans that had been hanging around my neck like a millstone for a decade. It was the radiator in my car I had been praying would last one more winter. It was the possibility of sleep. Real sleep. Audrey Martha asked. "Are you still there?" "Yes," I managed to whisper. "I am just surprised. I did not know. Your grandfather wanted you to have a cushion," she said gently. "He was very specific about that." I hung up the phone 5 minutes later with instructions to expect the paperwork within the week. I sat there in the gray afternoon light, and for the first time in years, I let myself cry. I cried for Artie, who used to sneak me peppermint candies when my mother said sugar made children hyperactive. I cried for the relief that washed over me, hot and shameful, because it felt wrong to profit from the loss of the only person who had ever looked at me and seen me, not just a useful extension of the family unit. I wiped my face, fixed my mascara in the compact mirror I kept in my desk drawer, and decided to drive out to Crestmore that evening. I wanted to share the news. I wanted to celebrate. I wanted, foolishly, to believe that my parents would be happy for me. The drive to Crestmore always felt like traveling back in time, as the city sprawl gave way to the manicured lawns and wrought iron gates of the suburbs. I felt my posture stiffen. My parents' house was a beautiful, imposing colonial with white pillars and shutters painted a tasteful, historical black. It was a house designed to be looked at, not lived in. When I pulled into the driveway, my sister's car was already there. Chloe, of course. Chloe was 29, 4 years younger than me, and lived her life in a perpetual state of soft focus crisis. She was beautiful, fragile, and utterly incapable of managing gravity, let alone a bank account. Seeing her red convertible, a gift from our parents for a graduation she had technically delayed by 2 years, parked at a crooked angle made my stomach tighten. I walked up the path. Taking a deep breath, I told myself to be charitable. I told myself that $75,000 changed things. It meant I did not have to worry about the rent hike next month. It meant I could be generous of spirit because I was no longer operating from a place of scarcity. I let myself in. The house smelled of lemon polish and roasting meat. "Audrey," my mother called out from the dining room. "You are late. We were about to start without you. I am right on time." "Mom," I said, checking my watch. I said 6:30. It is 6:28. Details. She waved a hand. She was setting the table, placing the heavy silver forks with military precision. My father was pouring wine at the sideboard, and Chloe was already seated, scrolling through her phone, looking bored and impossibly chic in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. "Grab a glass," my father said without turning around. "It is a Cabernet. Decent year." We sat down to dinner. The roast was perfect. The vegetables glazed to a shine. The conversation practiced. We talked about the neighbors. We talked about my father's golf handicap. We talked about the weather. It was the surface-level chatter that sustained my family, a smooth veneer over the cracks in the foundation. I waited for a lull. I took a sip of wine, the expensive liquid coating my tongue, and set the glass down. I got a call from Briar Glen today. I said, "From the probate office." The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. It was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a room holding its breath. My father carefully cut a piece of beef. "Oh," he said. I looked at him, then at my mother. Her eyes were fixed on the centerpiece, a complex arrangement of white lilies. "They told me Grandpa Artie left me a bequest," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to share the joy I had felt in the office. "A specific distribution, $75,000. Chloe looked up from her plate. Her eyes were wide, but there was something behind them, a lack of shock. She did not gasp. She did not say, "Wow, Audrey, that is amazing." She looked at our mother. "Well," my mother said, finally looking at me. Her smile was tight, the kind of smile you wear for a photo when your shoes are pinching your toes. "That is wonderful news, Audrey. But you know, of course, that these things are complicated." It did not sound complicated. I said, "The clerk said it was ready." My father cleared his throat. He put his fork down. "Audrey, listen, we have been meaning to talk to you about this. We knew the distribution was coming. You knew I asked. Why didn't you tell me we wanted to handle the logistics first?" he said. He reached for his wine glass, swirling the red liquid. "You know how Artie was. He was old-fashioned. He didn't understand the modern economy. He left that money in your name. Yes, but he intended it for the family, for the future of the family." I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. "What do you mean? For the family?" My mother reached across the table and patted my hand. Her skin was cool and dry. "Sweetheart, look at where you are. You have a stable job. You have your apartment. You are the strong one. You always have been." I pulled my hand back. "I am not rich. Mom, I have loans. Chloe needs a reset." My father interrupted. His voice was firm, the voice he used when he was closing a deal. "She has had a hard year. The layoff, the breakup. She needs a foundation to build on, a fresh start." I looked at Chloe. She was studying her fingernails. Picking at a cuticle, "We decided," my mother said, using the royal we that governed our lives, that the best use of Artie's legacy was to help Chloe secure her down payment and get her enrolled in that interior design program she has been looking at. I stared at them. The room seemed to tilt. Securing a down payment, enrolled, those were past tense verbs. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice dropping. "We advanced the funds," my father said. "We spoke to the estate lawyer last month. Since the money was coming eventually, we fronted the costs for Chloe's condo. It is a beautiful place, Audrey, just 2 streets over. Safe, secure. You spent it," I asked. The words felt thick in my mouth. "You spent my inheritance. It is family money." "Audrey," my mother said, her voice sharpening. Do not make it ugly. It was left to me. I said, specifically, by name, and you will be made whole later. My father said dismissively, when the market turns, when the rest of the estate settles, we are just moving pieces around on the board. It is all the same pot. It is not the same pot. I said, that is my money. Chloe finally spoke. Her voice was small, wavering, a perfect performance of victimhood. I told them you would be mad, she said to our parents. I told them Audrey counts every penny. That is not fair. Chloe, my mother snapped at her, then turned her gaze on me. Do not validate her fears. Audrey. Don't be selfish. Don't be selfish. The phrase hung in the air above the roast beef and the white lilies. It was the mantra of my existence. It was the command that had shaped my spine into a curve of permanent accommodation. I looked down at my plate. I saw my reflection in the china. Don't be selfish. I remembered being 10 years old, giving Chloe my brand new bicycle because she had crashed hers into a tree and wouldn't stop screaming. My parents had told me I was the big sister, that I should be generous. I walked to school for a year while she rode my bike. I remembered being 22, fresh out of college, working 2 waitressing jobs. My mother had called, breathless, saying they were short on the mortgage for the beach house because of a banking error. I had sent them $3,000, my entire savings. They never paid it back. When I asked, 6 months later, my father had laughed and bought dinner, saying, it all comes out in the wash. Honey. I remembered the car repairs I paid for when Chloe totaled her sedan, the rent gaps I covered when she decided she couldn't work in an office environment because the fluorescent lights damaged her aura. The tally ran through my head, a ledger written in invisible ink, 10,000 here, 5,000 there, a lifetime of being the safety net for people who were walking on a tightrope made of gold. I looked up. My father was watching me, gauging my reaction. He did not look guilty. He looked expectant. He expected me to fold. He expected me to sigh, pick up my fork, and eat the roast beef. We have some paperwork for you to sign, he said, his tone casual, assuming the argument was over. Just to formalize the tax situation. Since we fronted the money, we need to show that the distribution from the estate flows to us as a reimbursement. It is just a form to simplify taxes. He stood up and walked to the sideboard, retrieving a neat navy blue folder. He placed it next to my wine glass. I didn't touch it. I just looked at it. It is standard. My mother said. Dad's accountant drew it up. I opened the folder. Inside was a document on thick, cream-colored paper. Agreement regarding estate distribution was typed at the top in a severe, serif font. I started to read. The legal jargon was dense, intentionally opaque. Phrases like irrevocable assignment and consideration acknowledged swam before my eyes. I turned the page. Page 1 ended in the middle of a sentence about liability. I looked at the next sheet. It was labeled page 3. Where is page 2? I asked. My father frowned. He reached for the folder. What? The pages? I said, keeping my hand on the paper. This jumps from 1 to 3, and the paragraph doesn't flow. He waved a hand. A printing error. The accountant's secretary is incompetent. It doesn't matter. The signature line is on the last page. That is the important part. We need to get this in the mail tomorrow to avoid penalties. Penalties for who I asked. For the estate, he said. For the family. Just sign it. Audrey, we can get you a clean copy later. I looked at the signature line. Audrey Foster. My name, waiting for my compliance. I looked at Chloe. She was eating a potato, avoiding my eyes. She knew exactly what was happening, and she was letting it happen because it bought her a condo and a life she hadn't earned. I closed the folder. I am not signing this tonight. I said. The air left the room. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. Audrey, my father said, his voice dropping an octave. This is not a request. The money is already spent. The transfer has to happen to balance the books. Then you should have asked me before you spent it, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, calm, detached, as if I were speaking from a great distance. I am going to take this home, I said. I will read it over. I will check the page numbers. and I will let you know." I stood up. My mother stood up too. Her face went through a spasm of expressions. For a second, I expected rage. I expected the familiar guilt trip, the tears, the accusation that I was tearing the family apart. But that wasn't what I saw. For one split second, before she composed her features, I saw fear, stark, white-knuckled fear. Her eyes darted to my father, then back to me. "Audrey, sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling with a sweetness that felt like curdled milk. "There is no need to be dramatic. It is just a formality. Leave the folder here. We can look at it together after dessert. I made that apple crumble you like." I clutched the folder to my chest. "No, thank you. Mom, I am tired. I am going to go." My father stood up, blocking the path to the hallway. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, used to physically occupying space to get his way. "Audrey, leave the folder." I looked him in the eye. "I am 33 years old. Dad, I am taking the paperwork for my own inheritance home to read. If that is a problem, then we have a much bigger issue than a printing error." He hesitated. He looked at the folder in my arms, then at my face. He saw something there he hadn't seen before. Maybe it was the ghost of Artie. Maybe it was just the exhaustion of a woman who had run out of cheeks to turn. He stepped aside. I walked out of the house. I did not say goodbye to Chloe. I walked to my 10-year-old sedan, threw the folder onto the passenger seat, and locked the doors. As I reversed out of the driveway, I saw my mother watching me from the dining room window. She wasn't eating. She was on her phone, pressing the device to her ear with both hands. I drove home in silence. The radio felt too loud. The rain had stopped, leaving the roads slick and black. When I got to my apartment, I didn't open the folder immediately. I poured myself a glass of cheap wine that came from a box, not a cellar, and sat on my second-hand sofa. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had said no. I had actually said no. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, creeping anxiety. What if I was wrong? What if it really was just a tax issue? What if I was being selfish? The conditioning of a lifetime is not undone in a single dinner. The voice of my mother whispered in my ear, telling me I was ungrateful, that I was ruining everything. I slept fitfully, dreaming of missing pages and white lilies that turned into snapping mouths. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I had never done that before without a fever of 102. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the folder. I read the document again. It was garbage. Even with my limited legal knowledge, I could see it. The clauses were circular. The missing page was glaring. It didn't feel like a tax form. It felt like a surrender. At 9 o'clock, I called the probate office again. Briar Glen Probate, Martha speaking. Martha, it is Audrey Foster. I have a question about the distribution. Oh, hello, dear. Did you get the package? Not yet. I said, I wanted to ask. My parents told me that the money was intended for the family, that it was just in my name for tax reasons. Is there any record of that? Any letter of intent from my grandfather? There was a long silence on the line, then the sound of a file being opened. Audrey, Martha said, her voice crisp and official. Arthur Foster's will is very clear. The bequest is to Audrey Elizabeth Foster. Exclusively. There are no stipulations regarding your parents. In fact, she trailed off. In fact, what I asked, there is a note here in the file. It is handwritten by your grandfather. It was attached to the instruction for the bequest. Can you read it to me? I heard the rustle of paper. It says, my granddaughter Audrey is the only one with any sense. This is for her, not for the Sharks. Make sure she signs for it in person. Do not mail it to the house in Crestmore. The tears came again, but this time they were hot with anger. The Sharks. He knew. He had known all along. Thank you. Martha. I said, I will come to Briar Glen personally to pick up the check. Do not release it to anyone else. I cannot release it to anyone else. She assured me, it requires your notarized signature. I hung up. I sat there for a long time, listening to the refrigerator hum. They didn't just want the money. They had tried to trick me into signing it over before I even knew the truth of what it was. They had used my love, my guilt, and my desire to be a good daughter as a weapon. I stood up and went to my computer. I started a new folder on my desktop. I named it Evidence. I opened my banking app. I went back 5 years. I started screenshotting every transfer to my mother, every Venmo to Chloe, every check written to my father's business consultant for things I didn't understand at the time. June 2021. $500. Mom. Emergency vet bill. They didn't have a dog. December 2022. $1,200. Chloe. Rent help. March 2023. $2,000. Dad. Short-term loan. I put them all in a timeline. The total was staggering. Over 6 years. I had transferred nearly $30,000 to them. Small bleeding cuts that had kept me anemic while they feasted. Then, I remembered the old phone, when I upgraded my phone 2 years ago. I had kept the old one in a junk drawer because it had some photos I hadn't backed up. I dug it out, plugged it in, and waited for the battery icon to flicker to life. I scrolled through the saved voicemails. Most were mundane, but there was one from 3 years ago, Grandpa Artie. I pressed play. His voice, raspy and warm, filled the kitchen. "Hey, kiddo. Just calling to see how you are. I know your dad is writing you about that car payment. Don't let him bully you. Audrey, you work too hard. Listen, I am setting something aside, something your parents can't touch. I want you to have options. You hear me? Options. Love you. Kiddo." I saved the audio file. I emailed it to myself. I emailed it to my work address. I saved it to a cloud drive my parents didn't know existed, something your parents can't touch. But they were touching it. They were trying to devour it. I looked at the folder on my table, the agreement. If I refused to sign it, they would escalate. They would guilt. They would scream. They might even cut me off. But I needed to know exactly what they were trying to make me sign. I needed the missing page. I realized I had made a tactical error. I had taken the folder, but I hadn't taken everything. There were other papers on the sideboard last night. Papers my father had shuffled away when I asked about the page numbers. I needed to go back. It was risky, but it was Wednesday. My father played golf on Wednesdays. My mother had her bridge club at the country club. Chloe would be at the job hunt she simulated at the local coffee shop, which mostly involved Instagramming lattes. The house would be empty. I got in my car. I drove back to Crestmore. My heart was beating a steady, war drum rhythm against my ribs. The house was silent when I arrived. I used my key, the spare key hidden under the fake rock in the garden. The one I used when I came to water their plants while they vacationed in Cabo. I went straight to the dining room. The sideboard was clear. I went to my father's study. It was a room that smelled of leather and expensive cigars. His desk was a chaotic mess of papers, unlike the pristine image he projected to the world. I started sifting. I found the file box labeled Tax Prep. I found the folder labeled Audrey. I opened it. It looked identical to the one he had given me last night. Navy blue. Pristine. But when I opened it, the pages were different. This copy had all the pages. Page 1, page 2, page 3. I scanned page 2. It wasn't about taxes. It wasn't about a reimbursement. It was a loan agreement. A private loan agreement between my father and a lender I didn't recognize, Vantage Holdings. And there, at the bottom of page 2, was a clause that made my blood run cold. The undersigned guarantor agrees to assume full liability for the principal sum of $150,000 in the event of default by the primary borrower. This guarantee is secured by the guarantor's current and future assets, specifically including, but not limited to, the bequest from the estate of Arthur Foster. $150,000. They weren't just taking my $75,000. They were using my inheritance as collateral to secure a loan that was double that amount. They were leveraging me. They were betting my future on their debt. And on the last page, the signature line didn't say Audrey Foster. Beneficiary. It was typed clearly. In bold ink, Audrey Foster. Guarantor. I heard the garage door rumble open. Panic spiked in my chest. They were home early. I pulled out my phone. I took high-resolution photos of every page. Page 1, the damning page 2, the signature page. I shoved the papers back into the folder. I placed it back exactly where I found it. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and was standing there, trying to steady my breathing, when the kitchen door opened. It was my mother. She stopped when she saw me, her keys jingling in her hand. Her face went pale, then flushed with that same flicker of fear I had seen the night before. "Audrey," she said, "what are you doing here?" I took a sip of water. My hand was shaking. But I forced a smile. I forgot my sunglasses last night. I lied. I just popped in to grab them. She looked at me. She looked at the counter where my sunglasses were not sitting. She looked at the hallway that led to the study. "Did you bring the folder back?" she asked. Her voice was too casual, too light. "No," I said. "I am still reading it." I walked past her. I could smell her perfume. Chanel No. 5, the scent of my childhood, the scent of comfort. Now it smelled like a lie. "I will let you know when I am done with it." "Mom," I said. I walked out the door, the photos burning a hole in my pocket. I didn't look back. I knew that if I turned around, I would see her watching me. And I knew that the daughter who had walked into that house was gone. The Audrey who drove away was someone else entirely, and she was done being selfish. She was going to be precise. The drive to Briar Glen the following morning felt less like a commute and more like a pilgrimage to a funeral. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening rain that never quite fell, and the wipers on my sedan screeched rhythmically against the dry glass. I turned them off, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was going to see Martha again, but this time, I wasn't coming for a check. I was coming for answers. The Briar Glen probate office was housed in a brick building that smelled of damp wool and floor wax. When I walked in, Martha looked up from her desk. She adjusted her spectacles, her expression shifting from bureaucratic indifference to a guarded recognition. "Ms. Foster," she said, "I did not expect to see you until the distribution was finalized. I need to see the records." "Martha," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, "I need to see exactly how the funds were moved. You said on the phone that the distribution was ready, but my parents said they had already advanced it." Martha hesitated. She looked at the open door of her supervisor's office, then lowered her voice. "Come here," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk. She pulled a thick file from a drawer. It was labeled Foster. Arthur, specific bequest. She opened it, revealing a stack of transaction logs printed on thermal paper that curled at the edges. "I cannot give you legal advice, Audrey," she said. Her tone clipped. "I want to be very clear about that, but I can explain our procedures." "Please," I said. "For a distribution of this size, specifically one earmarked to an individual beneficiary, we require direct authorization," she said. She tapped a line on a document. "The funds were released from the estate's holding account into a temporary trust account 3 weeks ago. From there, they were dispersed. Dispersed where I asked." She turned the page. "To an account ending in 4492. I stared at the number. It wasn't my account. It wasn't my parents' main checking account, which I knew by heart from years of transferring money to cover their emergencies. "Who authorized this?" I asked. Martha slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a directive of transfer. At the bottom, there was a signature. Audrey E. Foster. It looked like my signature. It had the same loop on the A, the same sharp cross on the T. If I hadn't known I was sitting in my office in the city on the date listed October 14th, I might have believed I signed it. "I didn't sign this," I whispered. Martha didn't look surprised. She looked tired. "The document was presented by your father, acting as executor of the general estate," she said carefully. "He claimed you had signed it at the family home to expedite the process, since he is the executor and a known figure in the community. The verification step was accelerated. I repeated, "You mean skipped?" Martha didn't answer. She just looked at the paper. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound, suffocating embarrassment. I felt stupid. I felt like a child who had been allowed to sit at the adults' table, thinking she was a participant, when really she was just the meal. My identity, my name, my signature, my credit wasn't mine. It was a resource. To them. I wasn't a person. I was a checking account with a pulse. "Can I get copies of these?" I asked. "All of them." Martha nodded. "I will print everything." I left the office 20 minutes later with a thick manila envelope tucked under my arm. I sat in my car in the parking lot and forced myself to look at the transaction records. There were two movements that made no sense. The first was a transfer of $10,000 that occurred 2 days before the estate officially closed its books for the month. It was labeled Administrative Advance. It had gone directly to a debit account I recognized Chloe's. The second was much larger. $50,000. It was labeled Reimbursement for Care and Maintenance. It had been routed to an entity called Crestmore Strategic Consulting. I had never heard of Crestmore Strategic Consulting. I pulled out my phone and searched the business registry. It was a limited liability company formed 6 years ago. The registered agent was my father. The address was a post office box in a strip mall 3 towns over. It was a shell, a bucket to catch water. They hadn't just stolen the money, they had laundered it. I needed to talk to Chloe. I drove back toward the city, but instead of going to my apartment, I went to the north side, to the trendy neighborhood where Chloe rented her transitional studio apartment, the rent for which I had paid 3 times in the last year. I texted her coffee, the roasted bean, 10 minutes, urgent. She replied with a sad face emoji. Then K. When I walked into the cafe, Chloe was already there, huddled over a matcha latte. She looked small in her oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that had taken 20 minutes to perfect. When she saw me, she didn't smile. She looked at the door behind me, checking for our parents. "Hey," she said, "Mom is freaking out. She says you stormed out yesterday." I sat down. I didn't take off my coat. "I know about the $10,000. "Chloe?" I said. She blinked, her mouth opening slightly. "What the transfer?" I said. "From the estate? Before it even closed. It went to your debit account." Chloe's face crumpled. "I didn't ask for it, I swear. Audrey, Dad just called me and said he was moving some money for the condo down payment and that I needed to transfer it to the realtor immediately. I didn't even keep it. It was in my account for like an hour. You didn't think to ask where $10,000 came from?" She looked down at her latte. "He said it was a bonus from his work. He said he wanted to help me. You know how he is. He wants to be the hero." "And the rest?" I asked. The other 40,000. Chloe froze. Her eyes darted to mine. 40, she said. I thought it was 65. The air between us seemed to vibrate. "I never told you the total was 75,000, I said softly. "And I certainly never told you how much was left after your 10,000. Chloe went pale. She realized she had slipped. She had heard the numbers discussed. She had been part of the conversation where they sliced up my legacy like a Thanksgiving turkey. I just heard Mom talking." She stammered. "Audrey, please. They are just trying to fix things. Dad is under a lot of pressure. The business isn't doing well. The business I asked. Or the consulting firm." She looked genuinely confused. "What consulting firm? Never mind." I said. I stood up. "Audrey, wait." She grabbed my sleeve. Her fingers were trembling. "Don't do anything crazy. Mom said you are going to ruin the family over a misunderstanding. She said you are being greedy." I looked at my sister's hand on my arm. I looked at her manicure, perfect, professional, expensive. I am not the one who spent money that wasn't mine. "Chloe," I said. I pulled my arm away and walked out. I was halfway to my apartment when my phone rang. It was my mother. I stared at the screen, watching the name Mom flash against a picture of us from a beach trip 5 years ago. In the photo, we were laughing, I wondered, for the first time. If I had been paying for that vacation, too, I answered. "Audrey." She said she was crying. It was a specific cry, breathy, high-pitched. designed to bypass logic and hit directly at the heartstrings. I am driving. Mom, I said. How could you attack your sister like that? She sobbed. She just called me. She is hysterical. She is fragile. Audrey, you know she is fragile. I asked her a question. I said, you are punishing everyone, she shouted. The sorrow instantly replaced by accusation. You are punishing us because you feel left out. Is that it? Because we helped her? You have always been jealous of the attention she needs. I gripped the steering wheel. The script was so old I could mouth the words along with her. Audrey the strong, Chloe the weak. Audrey the provider, Chloe the project. I am not jealous. Mom, I said calmly. I am robbed. There is a difference. It is family money, she screamed. It was Grandpa's money. I said, and now it is gone. We will pay you back. You have to stop this. You are going to kill your father. His blood pressure. I hung up. I didn't block the number. Not yet. I needed them to think they could still reach me. I needed them to think I was just sulking, not plotting. I needed to go to the house. I knew their schedule. Thursday nights were the Rotary Club dinner. My father was the treasurer, an irony that was not lost on me now. My mother never missed it. It was her stage. I waited until 7 o'clock. I parked my car 3 streets away, just in case a neighbor recognized it. I walked to the house in the dark, the autumn wind biting through my coat. I let myself in. The house was silent, the alarm system off. They rarely said it until they went to bed. I didn't go to the office this time. I went upstairs, to my old bedroom. It had been converted into a guest room years ago, but the closet was still full of my old things, boxes of high school yearbooks, participation trophies, and dusty binders. I pulled down a plastic bin labeled Audrey. Keepsakes. I sat on the floor, the synthetic carpet rough against my legs. I opened the bin. It was mostly what I expected, grade school report cards, a dried corsage from prom. But at the bottom, underneath a layer of drawings I had made when I was 6, there was a stack of envelopes. They were slit open. I picked up the first one. Citibank, addressed to Audrey Foster, dated 7 years ago. I opened it. It was a statement for a credit card with a $5,000 limit. The balance was maxed out. I picked up the next one. Chase, a checking account overdraft notice. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. These weren't recent. These were from when I was 26, 24, even 22. They had been opening accounts in my name for a decade. I dug deeper. At the very bottom, crumpled into a ball, was a letter from a credit bureau. I smoothed it out against my knee. Dear Ms. Foster, per your request, we have removed the security freeze on your credit file. If you did not authorize this action, please contact us immediately. The date was 4 years ago. I remembered that time. I had tried to buy a car, and the dealership had told me my credit was locked. I had mentioned it to my father. He had told me it was probably a glitch, that he would help me look into it. 2 days later, the dealership called and said everything was fine. I thought he had fixed a glitch. He had impersonated me to lift the freeze so they could keep borrowing. I sat there in the dark room, surrounded by the ghosts of my childhood, and realized that I had never really left this house. I was just a remote extension of it. I was an asset they managed, a portfolio they dipped into whenever the appearances got too expensive to maintain. I took the letters. I took the credit bureau notice. I put them in my bag. I left the house. Locking the door behind me, I felt like I was burglarizing my own life. The next day, I took a half day off work and drove to Lakehurst. It was a larger town, far enough away from Briar Glen and Crestmore that my father's name meant nothing. I had an appointment with a consumer rights attorney named Mr. Vance. His office was in a glass building that looked sharp and modern. Mr. Vance was a man who looked like he was made of angles. Sharp nose, sharp suit, sharp eyes. He listened to me without interrupting. He looked at the screenshots of the text messages. He looked at the directive of transfer. He looked at the old letters I had stolen from the keepsake box. When I finished, I waited for him to be shocked. I waited for him to tell me this was the most horrific thing he had ever heard. Instead, He leaned back in his chair and tented his fingers. Familial fraud, he said. It is the most common form of identity theft we see. Common, I asked. Incredibly. Parents taking out loans in their children's names, siblings using each other's social security numbers. It usually starts small, a utility bill, a credit card for groceries, then it spirals. The perpetrators rarely see it as theft. They see it as resource management within the family unit. Resource management. I repeated. That was exactly how my father spoke. You have a choice. Audrey. Mr. Vance said. He looked at me with a clinical detachment that was somehow comforting. You can treat this as a family dispute, in which case you will likely end up paying these debts to keep the peace. Or, you can treat it as what it is, criminal fraud. If I treat it as fraud, I asked. Then we file a police report. We file affidavits of forgery with the banks and the probate court. We dispute every single trade line on your credit report that isn't yours. We lock everything down. And my parents. They will face an investigation. If the amounts are high enough, and with the inheritance theft, they certainly are. They could face felony charges. I looked out the window at the parking lot. I saw a mother buckling a child into a car seat. They said it was for the family. I said quietly, Mr. Vance picked up the directive of transfer. Audrey, he said, look at this date. This was 3 weeks ago. Look at this credit card statement from 7 years ago. This wasn't an emergency. This is a lifestyle. You are financing their illusion. He was right. It wasn't about survival. It was about the country club dues. It was about the new cars every 2 years. It was about Chloe's image. What do I do? I asked. Start with the boundaries, he said. The hard ones. I spent the next 3 hours in his office. We drafted letters. We called the credit bureaus. I watched him type, his fingers moving fast, dismantling the tangled web my parents had spun around me. I froze everything. Experian, TransUnion, Equifax. I put a fraud alert on my file. I changed every password to every account I owned to a random string of characters I kept in a physical notebook. Then, Mr. Vance drafted a letter to my parents. It was short. It demanded copies of all documents signed in my name. It revoked any power of attorney. Implied or explicit, it stated that all future financial communications regarding the estate must go through his office. It felt cold. It felt necessary. I went home that evening feeling lighter, but also hollow. I had severed the cord. The silence from my phone was deafening. I had expected my mother to call again, but she hadn't. Maybe they knew. Maybe they sensed the shift in the universe. I ordered takeout and sat on my floor, organizing the paperwork into piles. Theft, forgery, manipulation. At 8 o'clock, the buzzer to my apartment building rang. I checked the monitor. It was a mail carrier. Delivery for Audrey Foster. The voice crackled. Certified mail. Needs a signature. I buzzed him in. I met him at my door. He handed me a stiff, cardboard envelope. I signed for it. My hand steady this time. I took it into the kitchen and slid it open with a knife. It wasn't from my parents. It wasn't from the probate court. It was from a private lending firm called Apex Capital. I pulled out the letter. It was a notice of default. Dear Ms. Foster, this notice serves to inform you that the loan agreement 88,392 on which you are listed as the co-signer and guarantor is 30 days past due. The primary borrower, Arthur Foster, has failed to remit the required payment. Total amount due. Immediately, $8,400. Total principal balance. $150,000. If payment is not received within 10 days, we will exercise our right to accelerate the loan and pursue full collection measures against all listed assets. I stared at the paper. The date of the loan was 6 months ago, before Grandpa died, before the inheritance. They hadn't just used the inheritance to cover a debt. They had used me to secure the debt in the first place, forging my name as a guarantor while I was busy working, saving, and buying them anniversary gifts. 10 days. I looked at the calendar on my wall. 10 days to come up with $8,000, or they would come for everything I actually owned. My car, my savings, my life. I picked up the phone. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call Chloe. I looked at the number for Apex Capital. I was done crying. I was done asking. I was ready to burn the script. I stood on the front porch of my parents' house in Crestmore with the Apex Capital envelope in my hand. The paper felt heavy, like it contained lead instead of a single sheet of printed threats. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of crisp, golden autumn day that usually signaled football games and pumpkin carving. For me, it signaled the end of the polite fiction I'd been living in for 3 decades. I rang the doorbell. I still had my key, the one hidden under the fake rock. But I didn't use it. Guests knocked, strangers knocked, and after what I had found in the mail, I was no longer family. I was a cosigner. My father answered the door. He was wearing a cashmere sweater, holding a mug of coffee that steamed in the cool air. When he saw me, his smile was a reflex, a muscle memory of charm. Before his eyes dropped to the envelope in my hand, the smile vanished. "Audrey," he said, "we didn't expect you." I walked past him into the foyer. The house was quiet. "I received this yesterday," I said, holding the letter out. "It says I am in default on a loan for $150,000. It says I am the guarantor." My father took the letter. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He looked at the return address and let out a short, dismissive breath, like he was annoyed by a fly. "Apex." He muttered, "They are incompetent. This is a clerical mistake. Audrey, I told them to remove your name from the draft paperwork months ago." "The draft paperwork?" I asked. "I never saw any draft paperwork. I never spoke to Apex. I never authorized a credit pull." He turned and walked into the living room, gesturing for me to follow. He sat down in his leather armchair, the one he always sat in when he wanted to lecture us. It was a business strategy. He said, waving the envelope, "We were looking at refinancing some assets. Your name was put on the application as a placeholder because of the trust structure. It was never meant to be finalized. Their system must have auto-generated this notice. I will call them on Monday and have it scrubbed." He took a sip of his coffee. His hand was steady, but he was looking at a point just over my left shoulder. He couldn't meet my eyes. A placeholder doesn't generate a default notice with a threat to seize assets in 10 days. I said, "My mother came in from the kitchen. She was wiping her hands on a dish towel. When she saw the tension in the room, the way I was standing with my feet planted apart, she stopped." "What is happening?" she asked. "Audrey got a letter." My father said, "A computer error. She is overreacting, as usual." I looked at my mother. "Mom, this isn't an error. This is a loan for $150,000. It is past due, and my signature is on it." My mother looked at the envelope in my father's hand, then at me. Her face didn't show confusion. It showed terror. "Audrey, keep your voice down," she hissed, glancing toward the windows. "The neighbors. Come on." "I don't care about the neighbors," I said. "You have to," she insisted, rushing over to close the blinds. "If people hear about this, if it gets out that we have financial complications, it would destroy the family. Do you understand? It would ruin your father's reputation." I watched her frantic movements, the way she smoothed the curtains, and then something inside me shifted. It was a physical sensation, like a gear clicking into a new position. For years, whenever I confronted them, I had brought my emotions. I had brought my hurt feelings, my tears, my plea to be seen and respected, and every time they had used those emotions against me. They had called me dramatic, sensitive, selfish. They had managed my feelings so they wouldn't have to manage their actions. I realized, standing there on the Persian rug, that I was bringing the wrong currency to this transaction. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, spiral-bound notebook and a pen. I opened it to a fresh page. "Dad says the default notice is a clerical error." I said aloud as I wrote the words down. "He claims my name was a placeholder. Mom is concerned about the neighbors hearing." My father stopped mid-sip. "What are you doing?" "I'm taking notes," I said, not looking up. "I want to make sure I have the details correct for when I speak to the lender." "Put that away," he snapped. "You are not speaking to the lender. I handle the finances in this family. I looked up. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him. I am the guarantor. Dad, legally, I am the finance. So, did you sign my name? He stood up, his face reddening. I did what I had to do to protect this family. You have no idea the pressure I'm under. The market has been brutal. I needed liquidity. So you forged my signature, I asked. Writing again. Dad admits to needing liquidity. Dad implies he signed for me. Stop writing, he shouted. My mother burst into tears. She collapsed onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. Why are you doing this to us? She wailed. We gave you everything: dance lessons, college, this life, and now you are treating us like criminals. I watched her cry. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times. Usually, it made me rush to comfort her, to apologize, to fix whatever I had broken. Today, I just felt tired. I am not treating you like criminals. Mom, I said calmly, I am treating you like a liability. The stairs creaked. I turned to see Chloe standing there. She was wearing pajamas, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked young and small. She looked at Dad, red-faced and panting. She looked at Mom, sobbing on the couch. Then she looked at me with my notebook. They told me you knew, she whispered. I turned to her. What did you say? Chloe walked down the stairs, her hand gripping the banister. When they transferred the money for the condo, when they moved the inheritance. I asked them if you were okay with it. I asked if you were mad. And what did they say? I asked. My father took a step toward her. Chloe, don't. They said you agreed to help, Chloe said, her voice shaking. They said they talked to you, and you said yes. They said, Audrey always helps. Audrey is the good one. The words hung in the air. Audrey always helps. It wasn't a compliment. It was a strategy. They had banked on my compliance. They had leveraged my history of love and turned it into a line of credit. I looked at my sister. I saw the guilt in her eyes, but I also saw the relief. She was relieved because she had believed the lie. It was easier to believe I was a willing martyr than to accept that our parents were thieves. I didn't agree. Chloe, I said softly, I didn't know about the condo money until Tuesday. I didn't know about this loan until yesterday. Chloe put a hand to her mouth. Oh my God. I closed my notebook. I'm going to fix this, I said to the room. But not the way you want me to. I walked out. My mother was still crying, but the sound didn't follow me to the car. I left it there, trapped behind the closed blinds of the house in Crestmore. On Monday morning, I was back in Mr. Vance's office in Lakehurst. I sat across from him, the notebook on his desk. I recounted the conversation. I handed him the default notice. Mr. Vance adjusted his glasses. He didn't look angry. He looked focused. This changes things, he said. This isn't just about the inheritance anymore. This is about exposure. If they default on this loan, the lender comes after you. They can garnish your wages. They can put a lien on your car. I know. I said, that is why I need to stop being polite. Mr. Vance nodded. He pulled up a document on his screen. We are going to send a formal dispute letter to Apex Capital, he said. We will state that the signature is a forgery and demand proof of authorization. We will include a sworn affidavit from you stating you were not present at the signing. He typed for a moment, then looked at me. And for the inheritance, he said, we need to force their hand. We need the documents they are hiding. He drafted a second letter. This one was addressed to my father as the executor. It was cold. It was factual. It demanded a full accounting of the estate's assets and expenditures within 7 days. It felt strange to read it. Ms. Foster demands. Failure to comply will result in legal action. It felt like I was reading about a stranger. But as I signed the bottom of the page, I felt a surge of power. It wasn't the manic energy of a fight. It was the solid, heavy power of truth. I wasn't pleading with them to love me anymore. I was compelling them to answer me. After the meeting, I drove to Briar Glen. I needed to see Martha one more time. The probate office was quiet. Martha was eating a sandwich at her desk. When she saw me, she wiped her mouth quickly and stood up. "Audrey," she said, "I didn't think I would see you again so soon. I need to file a formal request for an accounting." I said, "My lawyer drafted it." I handed her the document. She read it over, her lips moving silently. Then she looked up at me over her spectacles. "You know what this does, don't you?" she asked quietly. "Tell me." I said. Martha walked around the desk. She lowered her voice to a whisper. "Your grandfather. He was a sharp man. Audrey, he knew your father. He knew how he operated." She glanced at the door. When Arthur set up the specific bequest, he left a file with the judge. He called it his fail-safe. He gave instructions that the file was only to be opened if you, the beneficiary, personally requested a forensic accounting of the estate. "A fail-safe," I asked. "What is in it? I don't know." Martha said, "It is sealed. But I do know that filing this request triggers an automatic review by the court. It takes the control out of the executor's hands and puts it in the judge's hands." She looked at me with a mixture of concern and respect. "If you file this, Audrey, there is no going back. It becomes a matter of public record." I thought about my mother closing the blinds. I thought about the lie they told Chloe. "File it," I said. Martha stamped the document. The sound of the stamp hitting the paper was loud, like a gunshot in a canyon. 2 days later, the tone changed. I received a text from my father. Not a demand, not a dismissal. "Audrey, please come over for dinner tonight. Just us. We need to talk calmly. We want to explain." I didn't go to the house. I replied, "I will meet you at the diner on Main Street. 6:00 p.m. I chose a public place. I wanted witnesses. I wanted neutral ground. They arrived 10 minutes early. My mother was wearing dark sunglasses, though it was overcast. My father looked older than I had ever seen him. His shoulders were slumped. They ordered coffee. I ordered an iced tea. "Audrey," my father started. He didn't use his booming voice. He used a soft, reasonable tone. "We received the letter from your lawyer. Good." I said. "You have to understand," he said, leaning in. "We didn't steal anything. We borrowed it. It was a bridge to what I asked." Chloe's situation was urgent. My mother chimed in. She took off her glasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She needed that house. "Audrey," she was falling apart. "We just needed to move the funds temporarily to secure the closing. We were going to put it back as soon as the consulting contract came through." The consulting contract, Crestmore Strategic Consulting. I pulled my notebook out. "You say it was for Chloe's house," I said, "and that it was urgent." "Yes," my father said. "We had to act fast." I looked at the notes I had made from the transaction records. "The transfer from the estate to your consulting firm happened on October 2nd. I said, "Chloe didn't put an offer on the condo until October 20th. I checked the MLS records." My father blinked. He opened his mouth. But nothing came out. "And," I continued, "the money didn't go to a title company. It went to your shell company. And from there—" I paused. I had spent the last 2 nights digging. I had followed the breadcrumbs of public records, cross-referencing the address of the consulting firm with other filings. "From there," I said, "it went to Apex Capital." The silence at the table was total. The waitress came by to refill coffee, saw the faces, and retreated. "You weren't helping Chloe." I said, "You were paying a debt." My father looked down at his hands. "It's not just one debt." "Is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. I found the UCC filings. "Dad," I said, "you have been paying interest to Apex for 4 years. Monthly payments. High interest. You didn't take this loan out recently. You have been rolling it over." He sighed. A long, rattling sound. "We had a bad year," he said, 4 years ago. "The investment in the tech park. It went under. I lost a lot of capital. I didn't want to worry you kids. I thought I could trade my way out of it. So you borrowed from a private lender." I said, "I had to maintain our position." He said, looking up. His eyes were desperate. "Do you know what happens in this town if you show weakness? The clients leave. The club memberships get revoked. We would have lost the house. So you used my name." I said, My credit was shot. He admitted, maxed out. I needed a fresh guarantor. I used your profile because you are clean, you are responsible. And then Grandpa died. I said, and you saw a pot of cash. It was going to fix everything my mother interrupted. If we could just pay down the principal on the Apex note, we could refinance the rest. We could breathe. We were doing it for the family. Audrey, to keep the roof over our heads. You keep saying for the family. I said, but I am part of this family, and you sold me. I stood up. I am not withdrawing the dispute. I said, Audrey, please, my mother begged. She grabbed my hand. Her grip was tight, frantic. If you proceed with this, the probate judge will see everything. They will see the Apex loan. They will see the transfers. It will be a scandal. It is already a scandal. Mom, I said, it is just a private one. Now it is going to be public. I pulled my hand away. I walked out of the diner. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sick. My parents weren't evil masterminds. They were desperate. Vain people who were terrified of being ordinary. They had sacrificed their own daughter to keep up a facade of success. They would rather I go bankrupt than the neighbors know they were broke. I went home and sat in the dark. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Martha. Audrey. She said, her voice was urgent. What is it? The judge reviewed your request for an accounting. He opened the fail-safe file. And he found irregularities in the executor's previous reports. Significant ones. He has flagged the estate for fraud. I closed my eyes. He is calling for a hearing. Martha said, he wants sworn statements from all parties regarding the distribution of funds. He wants your parents to testify under oath. Thank you. Martha. I said. I hung up. My phone buzzed immediately. A text message. It was my mother. Please don't. Just 2 words. No guilt trip. No manipulation. Just a plea from a woman standing on the edge of a cliff she had built herself. I looked at the words. Please don't. Please don't tell the truth. Please don't expose us. Please don't be a person. Be a safety net. I typed a reply. I stared at it for a long minute. I am sorry. Mom. But I am not the one who did this. I hit send. Then I turned off my phone. The morning of the hearing, I woke up with a sensation that was less like anxiety and more like a heavy, wet blanket draped over my chest. I lay in bed for 20 minutes, staring at the cracks in the ceiling plaster, tracing the jagged lines that looked like rivers on a map. I was about to walk into a room and dismantle my family. It was a surgical procedure, necessary to save the patient me, but it would leave scars that would never fade. I dressed in my darkest suit, a charcoal gray armor I usually reserved for aggressive contract negotiations or firing vendors. I brushed my hair until my scalp tingled. Pulling it back into a severe knot, I wanted no softness today. Softness was how they got in. Softness was the open door. The grief hit me somewhere between the coffee maker and the front door. It wasn't the sharp, piercing grief of losing Grandpa Artie. It was a dull, aching mourning for the parents I wished I had. I grieved for the version of my father who taught me to ride a bike. Not the man who forged my signature to save face at the country club. I grieved for the mother who used to sing to me, not the woman who viewed my financial solvency as a personal betrayal. I was grieving the death of an illusion. And honestly, that hurt more than the death of a man. I drove to the probate office in Briar Glen. The parking lot was wet from a morning drizzle. I saw their car, immediately the black luxury sedan, polished to a mirror shine, taking up 2 spaces because my father believed Dr. Dings were a personal affront. I met Mr. Vance in the lobby. He looked calm, carrying a slim leather briefcase. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded. "I just want it to be over." We walked into the conference room. It was a sterile space with beige walls, a long mahogany table, and a window overlooking the town square. My parents were already there. They had arrived early, and they had brought the full arsenal of their charm. My father was leaning back in his chair, laughing at something the court reporter had said, looking for all the world like a benevolent patriarch holding court. My mother was arranging a basket on the side table. "Audrey," she exclaimed when I walked in. She rushed over, arms open. I flinched. But she didn't stop. She hugged me, a cloud of floral perfume enveloping me. "You look so thin. Honey, are you eating? I brought those blueberry muffins you love. The ones with the crumble topping." I looked at the basket. It was wrapped in cellophane with a yellow ribbon. It was a prop. It was a weapon. It was designed to signal to everyone in the room, the mediator, the clerk, the reporter, that this was a loving family, and I was the prodigal daughter creating unnecessary drama. "No, thank you." "Mom," I said, stepping out of her embrace. She looked hurt, her lower lip trembling just enough to be visible, but not enough to ruin her lipstick. "Oh, well, they are there if you want them. We just want everyone to be comfortable." Chloe was sitting next to my father. She looked terrified. She was wearing a high-necked blouse and twisting a ring around her finger. Over and over. She didn't look at me. We took our seats on the opposite side of the table. The lines were drawn. The probate mediator, a man named Mr. Henderson, entered the room. He was older, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite, and eyes that had seen every variation of human greed. He didn't look at the muffins. He sat at the head of the table and opened a file. "We are here to address the discrepancies flagged in the estate of Arthur Foster." "Mr. Henderson said. His voice was gravelly and low. Specifically, the transfer of $75,000 from the specific bequest account, and the subsequent debt obligations attached to the beneficiary, Ms. Audrey Foster. My father cleared his throat. He smiled, a tight, controlled expression. "Mr. Henderson," he began, his voice smooth. "I think there has been a significant misunderstanding. My daughter has been under a lot of stress at work. She's confused about the timeline of events. We are a close family. We share resources. This is really a private domestic matter that has spilled over into your office." Mr. Henderson didn't smile back. He looked at a document in front of him. "I have a directive of transfer here, dated October 14th. Mr. Henderson said, "It authorizes the movement of funds from the estate to a third-party account. It is signed by Audrey Foster." My father nodded vigorously. "Yes, as I said, we handle things together." Mr. Henderson looked at me. "Miss Foster, did you sign this document?" "No," I said clearly. My mother let out a small, shocked gasp. "Audrey, how can you say that?" Mr. Henderson held up a hand to silence her. He looked back at my father. "Mr. Foster, you maintain that your daughter signed this I do," my father said. He sounded disappointed, as if he were covering for a lying child. "She signed it at our house. We had a family meeting. She was happy to help her sister. She signed it right at the dining room table." When Mr. Henderson asked, my father shrugged. "It must have been mid-October, around the 14th, as the document says. Maybe the weekend before. We have so many dinners. The dates blur, but she was definitely there. I felt a cold calm settle over me. This was the moment. They were committed to the lie. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Mr. Vance took it and slid it across the table to the mediator. "Mr. Henderson, Mr. Vance said, "This is an employment verification log from Miss Foster's firm, along with flight manifests and hotel receipts." Mr. Henderson opened the folder. He adjusted his glasses. "On October 14th, Mr. Vance continued, and for the 3 days preceding and following it, Miss Foster was in Chicago for a mandatory leadership conference. Here is a time-stamped photo of her delivering a keynote speech on the 14th. Here is her hotel checkout receipt from the 16th. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that rings in your ears. The only sound was the rustle of paper as Mr. Henderson turned the pages. My father's smile faltered. He blinked, looking at the folder as if it were a poisonous snake. "Well," he stammered, "I might have the date wrong. It could have been September, as I said. The dates blur. The document is dated October 14th. Mr. Henderson said, his voice hardening. "And the notary stamp is dated October 14th. Are you suggesting the notary falsified the date? My father's face went red. No, of course not. I am just saying. Perhaps Audrey signed it in advance. Yes, that is it. She signed it in September, and we dated it for the transfer. Mr. Henderson looked at me. I did not sign it in September. I said, I have never seen that document until Martha showed it to me last week. My mother suddenly leaned forward. She reached across the table, her hands grasping toward me. Audrey, please, she begged. Her voice broke. Why are you doing this? We are your parents. We gave you life. Look, I will sell my ring. She began to twist her wedding ring, a large diamond that she had upgraded 10 years ago during one of their flush periods. I will sell it right now, she cried, tears spilling over. I will sell the ring and pay back the $75,000. Just stop this proceeding. You are going to ruin your father's name over money, over paper. For a second, the old guilt flared. I saw my mother, desperate and weeping, offering up the symbol of her marriage to save the family. It was a powerful image. It was designed to break me. I almost opened my mouth. I almost said, Okay, Mom, sell the ring. Let's go home. But then I remembered the envelope from Apex Capital. I remembered the phrase, guarantor of full liability. I remembered that they weren't just asking for forgiveness for the money they took. They were asking me to stay silent about the debt they had strapped to my back. I am not ruining Dad's name, I said, my voice shaking slightly. He did that when he forged my signature, and selling the ring won't fix the fact that there is a $150,000 loan in my name that I didn't agree to. My mother stopped twisting the ring. She froze. What loan, Mr. Henderson asked sharply. Mr. Vance slid another document across the table. The default notice from Apex Capital. Mr. Foster. Mr. Henderson said, looking at the notice. This debt lists the estate beneficiary as a guarantor. Was this disclosed to the probate court? My father was sweating now. Beads of perspiration had formed on his upper lip. It was a clerical error. He muttered, I told Audrey that. It was a placeholder. Mr. Henderson looked at the clerk. Martha, who was sitting in the corner with a laptop. Martha, do we have the original submission of the beneficiary agreement? The one Mr. Foster submitted to the court in August. Yes, sir. Martha said. She tapped a few keys. I have the digital scan of the initial filing, and I have the hard copy Mr. Foster brought in today. Bring them up. Mr. Henderson ordered. A large monitor on the wall flickered to life. On the left was a document labeled Exhibit A, August submission. On the right was Exhibit B, October submission. They looked identical at first glance. Standard formatting, legalese, but Mr. Henderson zoomed in on paragraph 4. In the August version, the one my father had likely prepared as a draft paragraph 4, was a standard release of liability for the executor. In the October version, the one with my forged signature paragraph 4 had been expanded. The beneficiary acknowledges receipt of funds and agrees to serve as guarantor for the debts of Crestmore Strategic Consulting, specifically the note held by Apex Capital, leveraging the bequest as primary collateral. The room was silent again, but this time, it wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a trap snapping shut. This is not a tax form, Mr. Henderson said, his voice cold and flat. This is a deliberate alteration of a legal instrument to assign third-party debt to a beneficiary. He looked at my father. Mr. Foster, did you alter this document? My father sputtered. There were many drafts. My attorney, the consultant. There was no attorney. I said, I looked at him. There was just you. Dad, you and the scanner in your study. My father slammed his hand on the table. It was a violent, desperate sound. I did it for you, he shouted, pointing at me. I did it to save the inheritance. The creditors were circling. Audrey. If I hadn't secured that loan, they would have come for the whole estate. I was trying to protect the money. By stealing it, I asked. By gambling with my credit, you are ungrateful. He hissed. You have no idea what it costs to maintain this family. You have no idea the burden I carry. And then, a small voice cut through the shouting. He told me it was just paperwork. We all turned. Chloe was sitting there, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't looking at Dad. She was looking at the table. "Chloe," I said softly. "I heard them." She whispered, "In the kitchen. The night before you came over for dinner." Dad said, "We will fix it after the inheritance hits." My mother grabbed Chloe's arm. "Chloe, shut up." "No." Chloe yanked her arm away. She looked at me, her eyes wide and panicked. I asked him what he meant. He said there was a cash flow problem with the business and he needed to borrow against the estate for a few weeks. He said you would never know. He said, "Audrey is too busy to read the fine print. She will just sign it if we tell her it is for taxes." She started to sob. I didn't know it was fraud. "Audrey, I swear, I thought it was just moving money around, like they always do." I looked at my sister, for the first time. I didn't see a pampered princess. I saw a victim. She had been groomed to be helpless. Just as I had been groomed to be helpful, we were both products of the same manufacturing defect. I looked at my parents. My father was pale, defeated, staring at the wall. My mother was glaring at Chloe with a look of pure venom. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded me, but I forced it down. Rage wouldn't help me here. Precision would. "Mr." Henderson closed the file. "This hearing is recessed," he said. His voice was final. "Based on the testimony and the evidence presented, I am flagging this estate for forensic audit. I am also freezing all assets related to Crestmore Strategic Consulting that interact with this estate." He looked at my father. "Mr. Foster, I am removing you as executor effective immediately. An independent administrator will be appointed. And I must warn you, under state law, when I see evidence of document tampering and forgery, I am a mandatory reporter. I will be forwarding these transcripts to the district attorney's office for review." My mother let out a wail. It was a high, thin sound of despair. "Referrals," she cried. "Criminal referrals. For a family matter." "Fraud is not a family matter, Mrs. Foster," Mr. Henderson said. "It is a crime." He stood up and walked out. Martha followed him, clutching her laptop. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I locked my knees. I began to pack my papers into my bag. "Mr." Vance touched my elbow. "Are you all right?" he murmured. "I am fine," I said. I looked at Chloe. She was still crying, her head in her hands. "Chloe," I said. She looked up. "You need to get a lawyer," I said gently. "Not Dad's lawyer. Your own." She nodded, wiping her nose. I turned to leave. I had to walk past my parents to get to the door. My father was standing now. He seemed to have shrunk. The bluster was gone. The charm was gone. All that was left was a bitter, small man in an expensive suit. He stepped in front of me. I stopped. We were eye to eye. "You think you won," he whispered. His voice was a hiss, full of venom. "You think you are so smart with your folders and your dates? I didn't win anything." "Dad," I said, "I just didn't let you lose me." He leaned in closer. The smell of his cologne, usually so comforting, now smelled like rot. "If you walk out that door," he said, "you are dead to us. Do you hear me? You have no family, no home to come back to. You will be alone." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me that love was a transaction, that value was monetary, and that loyalty meant silence. I looked at my mother, who was staring at me with cold, dry eyes, already rewriting the narrative in her head to make herself the victim. I looked at the blueberry muffins on the side table. Untouched. I am already alone. "Dad," I said, "I have been alone in this family for a long time." I stepped around him. I walked out of the conference room, down the hallway, and out into the cool, damp air of Briar Glen. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, taking a deep breath. The air tasted like rain and exhaust fumes. It tasted real. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. I walked to my car. I didn't look back at the building. I didn't look back at the window where I knew they were watching. I had given them the paper. Now, I had to live with the blank page that came after it. The days following the hearing were defined by a silence so profound it felt like I had gone deaf. The phone did not ring. The text notifications did not chime. The constant, low-level static of my family's demands, the requests for help, the emotional check-ins, the guilt-laden updates on my father's health had been severed. I retreated into the mechanics of survival. I treated my life like a business that had just survived a hostile takeover attempt. I met with a separate estate attorney to update my will. It was a grim task for a 33-year-old, sitting in a leather chair and explaining that, in the event of my death, not a single penny was to go to my parents. I established a trust for a cat I did not yet own. I designated a local literacy charity as a beneficiary. Removing my parents from my legacy felt like an amputation, painful, bloody, but necessary to stop the gangrene from spreading. I secured my digital perimeter. I set up two-factor authentication on everything, routed to a new burner phone I kept in my desk drawer. I changed banks entirely, moving my checking and savings to an institution my father had never used, one that didn't know the foster name and wouldn't be swayed by his handshake. But a fortress is lonely. On Friday night, I went to Elena's apartment. Elena was my oldest friend, the one person who knew the geography of my family's dysfunction, but had never been forced to live in it. I sat on her floor, drinking red wine out of a mug, and told her everything. I told her about the forged signature. I told her about the loan. I told her about the look on my mother's face when she offered to sell her ring. Elena listened, her expression darkening with every sentence. "They tried to eat you," she said. It wasn't poetic, but it was accurate. "They thought I would just take it," I said. "They thought I would absorb the debt like I absorbed everything else, because you always have," Elena said. She wasn't being cruel. She was holding up a mirror. "You are the structural integrity of that family. Audrey, if you move, the whole thing collapses." "I am moving," I said. "Then let it collapse," she said. The following Tuesday, the preliminary accounting arrived from the court-appointed administrator. Mr. Vance forwarded it to me with a note. "Read this sitting down." I printed the document. It was 12 pages of dense financial grids, a roadmap of where my grandfather's money had gone. The $75,000 had not been transferred in a lump sum to Chloe. As they had claimed, it had been atomized. $30,000 had gone to Crestmore Strategic Consulting. $10,000 had gone to Chloe's account, the down payment money. But there was a third transfer, $35,000. It was dated October 3rd, the day after the funds hit the shell account. It was wired to an entity called Miller Holdings, LLC. I knew the name Miller. Jim Miller was a fixture in my parents' social circle. He was a hard money lender, a man who operated on the fringes of the respectable country club set. He was the guy you went to when the bank said no, but you still needed to look rich. He drove a Bentley and had eyes that looked like shark glass. I started digging. I spent my evenings hunched over my laptop, cross-referencing public records and UCC filings. I found a lien filing from 4 years ago, Miller Holdings, LLC, against Crestmore Strategic Consulting. The collateral was unspecified, future receivables. I pulled the thread harder. My parents hadn't just had a bad year with a tech park investment. They had bought into a private equity scheme that turned out to be a vaporware scam. When it collapsed, they didn't cut their losses. They borrowed to cover the buy-in, hoping to ride it out until it bounced back. It never bounced back. They had been paying Jim Miller interest on a high-risk private note for 4 years. The inheritance theft wasn't about Chloe. Chloe was just the garnish. The meat of the theft was the debt to Jim Miller. They had used my grandfather's legacy to make a balloon payment to a loan shark in a Bentley, so they wouldn't lose their social standing. And the Apex Capital loan, the one with my name on it, that was likely the refinance. They had paid off Miller with the inheritance, then opened a new line of credit with Apex to keep the carousel spinning, using me as the fresh horse because their own credit was exhausted. I sat back in my chair, the nausea rolling over me in waves. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a panic move. It was a Ponzi scheme, and I was the latest investor. I realized then that the house for Chloe narrative was a brilliant stroke of manipulation. They knew if they told me they needed money for a loan shark, I would have asked questions, but if they told me it was to help my fragile sister get a home, they counted on my guilt and my protective instinct to silence me. They had weaponized my love for my sister to cover their own rot. My phone rang. It was Chloe. I hesitated, then answered. Audrey, her voice was small, congested. Hi, Chloe. I am at the realtor's office, she said. I am putting the condo on the market. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel triumph. I felt exhausted. You don't have to do that for me. I said, I do. She said, I talked to a lawyer, not Dad's, a lady in the city. She told me that if the estate is clawed back, I could be liable for the $10,000 plus damages. I can't afford that. Audrey, and I don't want the house. Not like this. She took a breath, a ragged, wet sound. If I sell it, I can pay you back the $10,000 and maybe help with the rest. Chloe, I said firmly, listen to me. Sell the house if you want to, but do not give that money to Mom and Dad, and do not give it to me, but I owe you. You owe yourself a chance to get out, I interrupted. Put that money in an account they cannot touch. Get an apartment you can actually afford. Go to that design school if you want, but pay for it yourself. There was a silence on the line. They are really mad at you, she whispered. Dad says you are vindictive. He says you are trying to humiliate him in front of Jim Miller. I laughed, a short bark of a laugh. Jim Miller. I said, so that is what he is worried about. Not the fraud, not his daughters. He is worried about looking bad in front of the loan shark. Is that who Miller is? She asked. Yes, I said. Chloe, you need to separate your finances completely. Check your credit report. If they used my name, they probably used yours too. I found a credit card, she admitted, in my name, with a balance of $12,000. I never opened it. The pattern was absolute. We were resources. Get the lawyer to draft a fraud affidavit. I said, do it today. But that will get them in trouble. They are already in trouble. Chloe, the only question is whether you go down with them. I hung up. I felt a strange lightness. I hadn't saved her, she had to save herself, but I had given her the map. The next day, I went to Mr. Vance's office to draft the paper. This was the endgame. We had the evidence. We had the leverage. The forensic audit was looming over my parents like a thunderhead. Mr. Vance looked at me across his desk. You have a choice. Audrey, he said, we can let the court process play out. The judge will likely strip them of the executorship, order full restitution, and refer the case to the prosecutor. It will be public. It will be messy. And you might still end up fighting the lenders for years. Or I asked, or we offer them a settlement, he said, a binding, private agreement. They admit to the debt. They refinance the Apex loan to remove your name, using the house equity if they have to. They agree to a repayment plan for the $75,000. And in exchange, you withdraw the request for the forensic audit before it becomes a criminal referral. He slid a document toward me. It is a mercy they don't deserve, he noted, but it might get you your freedom faster than a trial. I read the document, notice of revocation and demand for cure. It was brutal in its clarity. It stripped away all the family language. No more help, no more emergency, just debtor, creditor, guarantor, fraud. I want to deliver it myself. I said, Mr. Vance frowned. That is not advisable. Emotions will be high. I need to do this. I said, I need to look them in the eye when I hand it to them. I need them to know that the person handing them this paper isn't their daughter Audrey anymore. It is Audrey Foster, the plaintiff. He sighed and handed me the heavy, cream-colored envelope. Be careful, he said. A cornered animal bites. I drove to Crestmore on a Thursday evening. The sky was the color of a bruise. I parked in the driveway. The house looked the same, the white pillars, the manicured hedge, but it felt different. It felt like a stage set where the actors had forgotten their lines. My guilt was a physical thing. It sat on my chest, heavy and suffocating. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm. Don't do this. Just fix it. Just pay it. Be the good daughter. I closed my eyes and breathed. No. I repeated it aloud in the empty car. No. I got out. My mother answered the door. She looked haggard. Her hair was pulled back, lacking its usual volume. She was wearing a bathrobe at 6 in the evening. "Audrey," she said dully. I walked in. My father was in the living room, sitting in the dark, staring at the unlit fireplace. He didn't look up. "Turn on a light," I said. My mother flicked a switch. The lamp cast long, harsh shadows across the room. I stood in the center of the Persian rug. I didn't sit down. "I have a proposal," I said. My father turned his head slowly. His eyes were bloodshot. "You have done enough," he rasped. "Miller called me. He heard about the probate freeze. He is calling the note." "Good," I said. "Then you can pay him with your own money." "I don't have any money," he shouted, surging out of the chair. It was a sudden explosion of movement that made my mother flinch. "You froze it all, the business accounts, the personal accounts. Everything is locked down because of your little stunt with the judge. Because you stole from the estate." "Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "I borrowed," he roared. I pulled the envelope from my bag. "This is a formal notice of dispute and a settlement agreement." I said. I held it out. Neither of them moved to take it. I placed it on the coffee table, on top of a stack of Architectural Digest magazines. "Read it," I said. "It outlines 2 paths. Path A. You sign a full admission of liability. You refinance the Apex loan, immediately sell the cars, sell the club memberships. I don't care how you do it, but you get my name off that paper within 30 days. You agree to a repayment plan for the inheritance. If you do this, I will ask the judge to close the forensic audit." "And Path B?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "Path B," I said. "I walk out of here. I let the audit finish, and I let the district attorney decide what to call what you did." My father stared at the envelope. He looked at it with a mix of hatred and fear. "You would send us to jail," he whispered. "You would really do that. I am not sending you anywhere." I said, "You drove yourselves there. I am just declining to drive the getaway car." My mother sank onto the sofa. She started to cry. But it wasn't the performative sobbing of the hearing. It was a quiet, hopeless weeping. "We just thought you would be fine," she said. The words hung in the air. What I asked. "We always knew you would be fine," she said, looking up at me. Her eyes were wet and honest. "You are so capable. Audrey, you always figure things out. Chloe needs help. She can't survive on her own. But you are strong." I felt a crack in my chest. "So because I am strong, I deserve to be used?" I asked. "Because I am responsible. I don't deserve protection." She didn't answer. She just looked at me, and I realized the terrible truth. They didn't steal from me because they hated me. They stole from me because they relied on me. My competence was their currency. They felt entitled to my stability because they had none of their own. I looked at my father. He had picked up the paper. He was skimming it, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. I saw the moment he reached the clause about the house, the clause where Mr. Vance had stipulated that if they couldn't refinance the Apex loan, they would be required to liquidate the primary residence this house to satisfy the debt. He went pale, a sickly gray color that drained the life right out of his face. He looked up at me. The anger was gone. In its place was a dawn of horrific realization. He wasn't looking at a daughter anymore. He was looking at a creditor. And for the first time, he realized that a creditor doesn't care about family dinners or guilt trips. A creditor only cares about the ledger. "You have no idea what you just woke up," he said softly. I don't think he was threatening me. I think he was talking to himself. I think he was looking at the precipice of his own life, the debts to Miller, the debts to Apex, the lies to the neighbors, and realizing that without my silence, the whole house of cards was about to come down. I turned to the door. "You have 48 hours to have your attorney respond to Mr. Vance," I said. I walked to the door. My hand was on the knob when my mother spoke. "Audrey." I stopped. I didn't turn around. "Do you hate us?" she asked. I thought about it. I thought about the years of being the good one. I thought about the car repairs I paid for. I thought about the signature on the guarantor page. "I don't hate you," I said. I opened the door. The night air rushed in, cold and clean. "I just can't afford you anymore." I walked out to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. My hands were shaking. A violent tremor that started in my fingers and ran up my arms. I gripped the steering wheel until it stopped. I looked back at the house. The light in the living room was still on. I could see the silhouette of my father standing by the window, holding the paper. He was right. I had woken something up. I had woken up the truth, and the truth, I was learning, was a demolition crew. I put the car in gear and drove away. I didn't go to Elena's. I didn't go to work. I went home, to my quiet, empty apartment. I sat on my couch and listened to the silence. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of solvency. The fallout did not arrive with a bang. It arrived with a ringtone. It was Tuesday morning, 3 days after I had left the settlement offer on my parents' coffee table. I was at my desk, organizing the digital files for the upcoming hearing. When my phone buzzed, I expected Mr. Vance. I expected my mother. But the caller ID displayed a name that made my stomach turn over. Apex Capital Partners. I stared at the screen. For a moment, the old fear flared the instinct to let it go to voicemail, to hide, to pretend that if I didn't hear the threat, it didn't exist. But I wasn't that person anymore. I was the person who had left a paper trail of truth in a house built on lies. I picked up the phone. "This is Audrey Foster." I said, "Ms. Foster, hello. This is Gregory Sachs, the Vice President of Risk Management at Apex." His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of the robotic aggression that had filled the default notice. It was the voice of a man who realized he was holding a grenade that had just had its pin pulled. "I am recording this call. Mr. Sachs," I said, "my attorney, Mr. Vance, is CC'd on all correspondence." Of course, he said quickly. "There is no need for hostility. Ms. Foster, we received the copy of the dispute notice you served to the primary borrowers. We just wanted to reach out to clear up some misunderstandings." "Misunderstandings," I repeated. "You mean the fraud?" "Well, that is a strong word," he said, his laugh nervous. "It appears there was some confusion regarding the collateralization of the loan. We have reviewed the file, and we see now that your signature on the guarantee does not match the exemplars provided by your counsel. It is a forgery." I said, "We are prepared to work with you," he said. "If you would be willing to pause the notification to the state banking regulators, we believe we can restructure the note with your father directly. We can release you from the obligation immediately." I leaned back in my chair. The power dynamic had flipped so fast it gave me whiplash. A week ago, they were threatening to seize my assets. Now, they were begging me not to call the regulators, my paper, the formal dispute. The threat of exposure had terrified them more than a default ever could. Apex Capital didn't care about my father's debt. They cared about their own license to operate. They couldn't afford a fraud investigation any more than my parents could. "Send the release of liability to my attorney by 5 o'clock today." I said, "And Mr. Sachs, yes. If you ever contact me again, I will file a harassment suit so large it will show up on your quarterly earnings report." I hung up. I sat there for a moment, listening to the hum of the office. I felt steady. It was a strange sensation, like standing on a deck that had stopped swaying in a storm. I realized that for years, my anxiety had come from trying to control things that were out of my hands, my parents' moods, their finances, their approval. Now that I had let go of the need to save them, I had full control over the only thing that mattered, myself. The probate hearing was scheduled for Friday. On Wednesday, my parents played their final card. It came in the form of an email from a lawyer I didn't know, a man named Mr. Blanton, Mr. Vance forwarded it to me with a note. Be careful. Read the fine print. The subject line was Proposed Settlement and Family Reconciliation Agreement. I opened the attachment. My parents were offering a deal. They would pay me $20,000 immediately, likely borrowed from yet another source, and agree to a payment plan for the remaining $55,000 over 10 years. In exchange, I would drop the fraud claim, withdraw the request for the forensic accounting, and sign a modified guarantor agreement. I read the clause 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. The beneficiary agrees to remain as a secondary guarantor on the Apex note for a period of 12 months to allow the borrowers time to refinance, during which time the beneficiary agrees not to disparage the borrowers to creditors. They were trying to trap me again. They were offering me a fraction of my own money in exchange for keeping my neck in the noose. They wanted to keep me on the hook for the loan, just for 12 months, which would undoubtedly turn into 12 years. They weren't negotiating for repair. They were negotiating for control. They still believed that my freedom was something they could buy back with a lowball offer. I called Mr. Vance. Rejected. I said, "Are you sure?" he asked. "It is $20,000 cash. It is bait," I said. "They want me to sign a new document to replace the forged one. If I sign this, I validate the debt. I become liable for real. You are learning." "Audrey," Mr. Vance said, "I will tell them we will see them in court." That evening, Chloe came to my apartment. She looked different. She had cut her hair. The long, high-maintenance blonde waves were gone, replaced by a sharp, shoulder-length bob. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that looked like it had come from a thrift store, not a boutique. "I did what you said," she said. Standing in my doorway, I pulled my credit report. "Come in," I said. She sat on my couch, holding a sheaf of papers. Her hands were shaking. It wasn't just the one card. She said, I looked at the report. It was a sea of red. There were 4 credit cards, a personal loan, a furniture financing account for a store in Crestmore. The total debt was over $40,000. "They told me they were building my credit score," Chloe whispered. Mom said, "We will open these in your name and pay them off every month, so when you want to buy a house, you will have a perfect history." I looked at the transaction history: groceries, gas, restaurants, a charge for a spa in Briar Glen. "They were living on you," I said. Chloe started to cry. Not the hysterical tears of the family meeting, but the slow, hot tears of betrayal. "I am 29 years old," she said, "and I have the credit score of a bankruptcy. I can't even rent an apartment without a cosigner. And guess who the only people willing to cosign are Mom and Dad." I said, it was a closed loop. They destroyed her independence to ensure she would always need them, and then used her dependence to justify stealing from me to help her. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even about money. Really, it was about entitlement. They felt entitled to consume us. I hugged my sister. It was the first time in years I had hugged her without feeling resentment. We were soldiers from the same war, comparing shrapnel wounds. "You are coming to the hearing on Friday?" I asked. She nodded against my shoulder. "I got a lawyer. She is filing an identity theft report tomorrow." "Good," I said. Friday morning broke cold and clear. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue, the kind that hurts your eyes. I arrived at the courthouse in Briar Glen 15 minutes early. I wore the same charcoal suit. I carried a single binder containing my timeline, the text messages, the flight logs, and the forgery affidavit. My parents were already there. Sitting on a bench outside the courtroom, they looked diminished. My father's suit hung loosely on his frame. He had lost weight in the last week. My mother was wearing dark glasses indoors. When they saw me, my mother made a movement as if to stand up, to rush over, to try one last emotional appeal. But then she saw my face. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was just done. She sank back onto the bench. We walked into the courtroom. It wasn't a dramatic venue from a television show. It was a small room with wood paneling that smelled of lemon oil and old paper. The judge, Judge Holloway, was a woman with sharp silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. Mr. Henderson, the mediator who had flagged the case, was present. So was the court-appointed administrator. The hearing began. My father's lawyer, a new man who looked harried and underpaid, tried to paint the picture of a misunderstanding. He talked about complex family dynamics and informal lending arrangements. He tried to suggest that I had verbally agreed to the loan and was now reneging due to a personal dispute. Judge Holloway listened, her face impassive. Then she turned to me. "Ms. Foster," she said, "what is your position?" I stood up. I didn't look at my parents. "Your Honor," I said, "my position is simple. I did not sign the directive of transfer. I did not sign the guarantor agreement. I was in Chicago on the dates in question. I asked for records immediately upon learning of the discrepancy. I disputed the debt immediately upon receiving the default notice. I opened my binder. Here is the proof of my location. Here are the emails requesting the documents which were withheld. Here is the affidavit from the notary stating she does not recall witnessing my signature." I laid the papers on the judge's bench. "I am not here to argue about family dynamics," I said. "I am here to correct a fraudulent accounting record." Judge Holloway flipped through the pages. The silence in the room was heavy. Then, she looked up. "There is one more piece of evidence to consider," she said. She reached for a thick sealed envelope on her desk. It had the seal of the Briar Glen probate office on it. This file was flagged to be opened only upon a formal contest of the accounting by the beneficiary. "Audrey Foster," the judge said. "It was left by the decedent, Arthur Foster." My father's head snapped up. He hadn't known about this. Martha, the clerk, had kept the secret well. The judge broke the seal. She pulled out a letter, handwritten on yellow legal paper. She adjusted her glasses and began to read aloud. "To the probate judge, if you are reading this, it means my granddaughter Audrey has finally stood up for herself. I hoped this day would not come, but I know my son. I know he views money as water, and family as the cup he drinks from. I have left a specific bequest to Audrey, but I suspect that by the time she tries to claim it, there will be pressure to share it, or it may already be gone. My son has a way of justifying theft as necessity. Therefore, I have established a separate, contingent trust. It is not large, $25,000, but it is held in a bond that is not part of the probate estate. It is payable only to Audrey Foster, and only if she personally appears in court to dispute the handling of her primary inheritance. Audrey, if you are hearing this, you are not selfish. You are smart. Take this money and walk away. Do not look back. Signed, Arthur Foster." The courtroom was absolutely silent. I felt the tears then. Not the tears of grief, but the tears of being seen. Grandpa Artie hadn't just left me money. He had left me a test. He knew that if I just went along with the family flow, I would never see this final gift. He knew that I had to be willing to break the peace to find my freedom. He had built a trap for my parents' greed and a lifeboat for my survival. My mother let out a sob. It was a raw, ugly sound. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying because she realized that her own father had known exactly who she was, and he had protected me from her. Judge Holloway set the letter down. She looked at my father with an expression of profound distaste. "The court finds that the executor has breached his fiduciary duty," she ruled. "The directive of transfer is hereby voided as fraudulent. The guarantor agreement is declared null and void, ab initio." She banged her gavel, a sharp, wooden crack that sounded like a bone breaking. "I am ordering the immediate freezing of all assets in the name of Crestmore Strategic Consulting. I am ordering a forensic clawback of the $75,000 transferred to Apex Capital and Miller Holdings. If the funds cannot be recovered, a lien will be placed on the primary residence of the executor." She looked at my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Foster. "You are hereby removed from any administration of this estate, and I am forwarding the transcript of this hearing, along with the exhibits regarding the forgery, to the district attorney's office for review." My father put his head in his hands. It wasn't a clean ending. The money was already gone, spent on debts and lies. The clawback would take months, maybe years. The lien on the house meant my parents would likely lose their home. Chloe's credit was still ruined. But as I stood there, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying since I was 10 years old. I wasn't responsible for fixing it. I walked out of the courtroom. My parents followed a minute later. They looked like ghosts. The charm was gone. The pretense of the perfect family had been stripped away by a handwritten letter from a dead man. "Audrey," my mother called out. I stopped on the courthouse steps. The wind was blowing, messing up my hair. But I didn't care. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at me. My father stood behind her, unable to even look at me. "You chose paper over people," she said. Her voice was trembling with bitterness. "You chose a legal document over your own flesh and blood. How can you live with yourself?" I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had asked me to sign a loan she knew I couldn't pay. I looked at the woman who had offered to sell her ring but never offered to tell the truth. I didn't choose paper over people. "Mom," I said softly. I walked down one step, closing the distance just enough to be heard clearly. "I chose reality over manipulation." She flinched. "And Mom," I added, "love without respect isn't love. It is just consumption, and I am done being eaten." I turned around. I walked to my car. I didn't look back to see if they were watching. It didn't matter anymore. I got into my car and started the engine. I drove out of the parking lot, past the brick buildings of Briar Glen, past the turnoff for Crestmore. I drove toward the highway. I had a lot to do. I had to meet with Mr. Vance to finalize the bond transfer. I had to help Chloe file her police report. I had to go to work on Monday and give a presentation. But for the first time in my life, the road ahead didn't look like a debt I had to pay. It looked like a life I finally owned. I rolled down the window and let the cold air hit my face. It felt like a beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Audrey's journey resonated with you. It is a hard thing to break the cycle of family obligation, especially when "don't be selfish" is used as a weapon against you. But sometimes, the most selfless thing you can do is protect your own future. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family to protect your peace? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice, resilience, and the moment the truth finally comes out. Thank you for your time. And remember, sometimes, the most powerful thing you can give someone is a piece of paper that says no.